The Library of Unread Letters. On Inheritance from the Dead. A scholar inherited his grandfather's chest. The chest had stood locked in the corner of his grandfather's study for 60 years. The scholar had visited his grandfather's house in his childhood perhaps 20 times. He had seen the chest, on each visit, in its corner. He had asked in his 6th year what was in it. His grandfather had smiled and had said, "That is for later." He had asked again in his 10th year. He had received the same answer. He had stopped asking. No one in the family had opened the chest. The grandfather had not, in his lifetime, opened it in any year his grandchildren had been present. The grandfather had died with the key around his neck, a small iron key on a thin leather cord. The funeral director had passed the cord, with the body's other personal effects, to the scholar's father, who had kept it for the years between the grandfather's death and his own, and had then passed it in his own will to the scholar. The scholar had inherited the key, the house, and the chest at the age of 42. He had not at first opened it. He had been busy with the funeral arrangements, with the sale of the smaller items in the house, with the disposition of the family business. He had moved into the house in the 3rd month after his father's death. He had brought his wife. He had set up his own study in the room that had been his grandfather's. He had, in moving the chest a few feet to one side to accommodate his desk, felt its weight. It was very heavy. When the chest was at last opened, after the funeral, it was full of letters. The scholar had used the small iron key. The key had turned easily. The lock had been kept oiled somehow by the grandfather through the long years. The chest had opened. The scholar had looked in. The letters had filled the chest to the top. There were perhaps 2,000 of them. They were bundled in groups, tied with ribbons of various colors. Some bundles were small, perhaps 10 letters. Some were thick, 50 or more. The letters were of various ages. The paper of some was new. The paper of others was so old it had begun to crumble at the edges. The handwriting on the envelopes was various, some in fine copperplate, some in rougher hands, some in scripts the scholar, on first glance, could not identify. He took out the top bundle. He untied the ribbon. He took out the first letter. He read it. It was a letter from his grandfather, addressed to the scholar's own father, dated 45 years earlier, perhaps a year after the scholar's father had married. It was a long letter. It was about a question of conscience. The father had, in his 1st year of marriage, considered some business arrangement of dubious moral standing and had written to his own father, the grandfather, for advice. The grandfather had written, in this letter, a careful and thoughtful reply. The letter had been opened. The wax seal had been broken, but the letter had been, by the look of the paper, never unfolded after the first reading, or possibly, the scholar realized on closer inspection, never read at all. The fold of the paper was crisp. The ink was unfaded. The letter had been opened, perhaps, by the father on the day it arrived, and then folded again and put aside, and then placed in the chest, and then forgotten. He took out the second letter. It was a letter from his great-grandmother to her son, his grandfather, dated some 70 years earlier. It was about a question of love. The grandfather had, in his youth, been in love with a woman whose family had disapproved. He had written to his mother for advice. The great-grandmother had replied. The letter was thoughtful and warm and full of the kind of practical wisdom the great-grandmother had been known for. It had also, on inspection, never been read. The wax seal was still intact. The letter had been delivered, received, placed in the chest by the grandfather and not opened. The grandfather had decided, perhaps, that he did not, in his young heat, want his mother's advice. He had decided, perhaps, that the advice would have been against the love. He had kept the letter, however, all his life. He had not, in any year after, opened it. The scholar took out the 3rd letter. It was older still. He read it. It had been written, he learned from the contents, by his great-great-grandfather, a man of whom the family had only vague memories. It was addressed to his great-grandfather's brother, who had died young, in some military engagement in a province the scholar had never heard of. The letter had never been sent. The recipient had died before the letter could reach him. The letter at the bottom was unsigned, as if the great-great-grandfather had not had time to finish. He read on. He read for the rest of that day. He read for the rest of that week. He set the letters out on the floor of his study in groups, organized first by sender and then by year and then by topic. He found, as he sorted, that the chest contained letters spanning some 150 years. They had been collected by the grandfather, who had inherited some from his own father, who had inherited some from his. The chest was a family record, but not, in any conventional sense, a genealogical record. It was a record of letters that had not in some way completed their function. It took him 3 years. He read them all. He understood by the end of the first year that no letter in the chest had been answered. Some had been read, some had been unopened, none had received a reply. The chest was, in essence, a collection of one side of a correspondence, letters written, sent or not sent, received or not received, but in all cases, in the end, not answered. The unanswered letters were, on the whole, the most interesting letters. He understood by the end of the second year that the letters were not, in any meaningful sense, addressed to the people whose names were on them. They were addressed to questions. Each letter contained an answer. The answers had been waiting in the chest for whoever, in the long line of the family, would finally ask the question. He understood also, by the end of the third year, that most of the answers were addressed to questions he himself had been asking in silence for many years. This was the most disconcerting part of his work. He had assumed, in the beginning, that he was reading the letters of his ancestors. He had been, in some sense, the letters had been written by his ancestors, but the letters, when he read them carefully, were not, in their deep address, written to dead recipients. They were written to him. They had been written by men and women who could not have known him, in response to questions he had been carrying in his own life, questions about marriage, about the management of inherited wealth, about the small dishonesties that accumulate in any business career, about the loving of children who do not, in their own lives, return the loving, about the loving of fathers who have died before the loving could be fully spoken. He sat in the empty study with the letters spread around him. It was the end of the third year. He was 45. His wife had been patient with the long project. She had brought him food on the evenings when he had not come out of the study. She had not, in 3 years, asked him what he was learning. She had understood in some way that the learning was private. "Why me?" he said. He said it aloud in the empty study with the letters around him. The chest answered. It had not, in 3 years, said anything. The chest had been, in its corner, simply a piece of furniture. But on this evening, with the letters spread out, with the last bundle untied, the chest spoke. "We wrote to whoever would finally ask," said the chest. The scholar looked up. "The letters in me," said the chest, "are not addressed in their deep sense to the names on the envelopes. The names are conventions. The deep address is to the future." Each letter was written by a person who had thought carefully about a question. The question, by the time of the writing, was already pressing on the writer. The writer answered it. The writer addressed the answer to a name, usually the name of the most plausible immediate recipient, a son, a daughter, a brother. But the deep address was to whoever, in the future of the family, would, in their own life, ask the same question. How did you know they would ask? Every family is, in some sense, a recurrence of the same questions. The questions are not, in any precise way, hereditary, they are not in the blood. But the family's circumstances, its work, its wealth, its religion, its place, set up a small number of recurring questions. Every generation of every family asks these questions. The questions are different on the surface in each generation. The deeper forms are the same. The letters in me have been written, in many generations, in response to the deeper forms. They have been kept in this chest for the generations that would ask in their own time. They are, in some sense, the family's answering machine. Why have they not been answered before? Because none of the previous generations have been ready. The question has to be asked from a particular place. Place is, in essence, a place of having been knocked about a little by life, having seen some things that the early certainties cannot account for, having come to the kind of unknowing that is willing to receive the answers. Most members of every family do not reach this place. The few who do not always look in the chest. The chest in your family has gone unopened in some generations for 40 years at a stretch. The letters in those generations simply waited. They were patient. The dead have time. Why was I the one? You were the one who had the curiosity, the patience, and the unknowing in the right combination. Your father had two of the three. Your grandfather had all three but had been raised in a household where the chest was, somehow, off limits. His own father had been a man who had refused to look. The refusal was, in some sense, the necessary condition for your eventual opening. The chest has been, in our family, waiting for the right combination for some generations. You are the combination. The waiting has been worth it. It was not a prophecy, said the chest. It was patience. Every family has a chest of unread letters. They are not heirlooms. They are deferred conversations. The dead have things to say. They wait for someone to ask. They do not mind being read 50 years late. They mind being unread. The scholar sat with this. He understood after some time that the chest was right. The letters had answered his questions. The chest's voice was now telling him what to do with the answering. What should I do now? Copy them, said the chest. Make a fair copy of every letter. Add to each copy a brief note describing the question the letter, in your understanding, answers. The original letters in time will degrade. Paper is mortal. The copies with the notes will be more useful to the next generation than the originals would have been. Leave the copies in a new chest to your own son. Do not, however, tell him what is in the chest. He must, when his own time comes, open it himself. The scholar copied the letters. It took him another 4 years. He had, in those 4 years, a great deal of help from his wife, who, having been patient through the 3 years of reading, had decided that the copying was a project she could share. She wrote in her own clean hand the copies. He composed the notes. They worked in the evenings in the study with the letters between them. They were in those years closer than they had been in their previous 20. When the copying was done, he made a new chest. He had a carpenter build it. It was slightly larger than the original. He put the copies in their bundles into the new chest. He locked it. He hung the key on a thin leather cord. He put the cord in his will. He kept the original chest, with the originals in his own study. He looked at it occasionally in the years that followed. He was glad it was there. He understood that the letters in their original paper were in some sense holier than the copies. He died at 73. His son, who was 38, inherited the new chest with the leather cord. He found in his father's will a single note. The note said, "Open these only when you are ready to be answered." He waited. He had been close to his father. He had been told vaguely about the original chest. He had decided that he would, when the time came, know when the time had come. He opened the new chest at 30. It was the wrong age. He was not at 30 ready. He had not yet asked the questions the letters answered. He read a few. They did not in his 30-year-old chest land. He closed the chest. He waited. He opened it again at 45. The letters on this reading landed. He cried. He had not known he had been asking. He spent the next 3 years reading. He made his own copies in due course. He left them in a third chest to his own son. The chests continue in the family in each generation. They are in some province on their 10th iteration. The questions are in each iteration slightly different. The deeper forms are the same. The dead in the chests continue to answer. The chest in the corner is full of letters. They are not addressed to the names on them. They are addressed to whoever asks. The dead are patient. They mind being unread. They do not mind being read 50 years late. The family's questions recur in deeper forms, generation after generation. The letters answer them. The chest waits. The opener must be in the right combination of curiosity, patience, and unknowing. Most are not. The few who are copy the letters for the next generation. The chests continue.